Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight.
Welcome to this week's episode of Freight 360. If you're a fan of the show, please share us with your colleagues. Appreciate all the likes, comments. If you have any questions you want us to answer on the Q&A on the final mile, please put them in YouTube. We try to get to them as quickly as possible. Also, if you haven't signed up, do a favor and jump on our website, sign up for our newsletter. It goes out twice a week, has a bunch of content, tips, videos, stuff that we share that's hopefully helpful in your journey. And Nate's out this week because the National Guard got called up to deal with the prison strike in New York. So Steven's going to be with me, but we're going to have a pretty good episode. We are going to jump into back office fundamentals, things that you need to understand to keep your freight brokerage running, things that we've run into from problems and things that we've had to fix that we probably should have been able to catch earlier, as well as just common things that you'll need to understand when setting it up to make that, more efficient, a little faster. I would say it's probably one of the most overlooked aspects of freight brokering. I don't think we ever get questions related to this. But I will tell you that when I've been building brokerages, it is the thing that is the most unexpected time suck. You end up spending so much more time than you think you will, both invoicing customers, tracking down bills of lading with carriers, organizing this, making sure that you're reconciling accessorials from detention to lumper charges. So we're going to break down from a really good 101 level, how to set this up and things to keep an eye out for when you are getting your brokerage off the ground. Because if you're one person or 100 people, again, this is a really important aspect of running a business, the cash flow. It coming in and going out, being able to keep your thumb on what's happening is super important. But let's jump in first. What do we got on sports? I didn't have much, but I know you threw something in the show notes.
I didn't see anything. I mean, it's that time of year. There's not a whole lot of sports going on. But I did join a flag football league, and we got wrecked. It was 89-0.
How does that even happen?
Well, I met half my team for the first time that night. No practices. I barely understood the rules, as did the most rest of the team. It was our first time ever doing it. And then we're all mid-30s kids, and the team we played was all college athletes.
Fair enough.
The three kids that I went up against were lacrosse players at their college, and they're D2, D1, something like that, and they were all-star lacrosse players at their high school. So I was like, cool, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it was a fun. I can't wait to go back this week. It was a blast.
That's awesome. I mean, I think playing any sports and doing activities like that are super worthwhile, no matter what the score is. Funny story. Last time I played flag football, I was in college, intramural league, obviously, and went to grab someone's flag, got my finger caught in their belt, because you have the belts with the flags on it, and pulled the tendon in my finger, which I then had to have surgically removed. So the tip of my ring finger, I still don't have a tendon in from playing flag football 20 some years ago.
Yeah, it was different because I played football in high school, and it's it's a 7-on-7 model, so it's much faster paced, and one of the rules that none of us knew until halftime was the A gap. So you have the center, and then you've got the space between the guard on either side is the A gap. Mm-hmm. And in flag football, you're not allowed to blitz that gap, and you're not allowed to rush through that gap. So the whole time, we're lining up tight to keep people from coming in down the middle.
For no reason.
At halftime, we realized.
They're just running around them.
They're just running. We didn't even have to. So, no wonder they were getting to us so quickly because we didn't space out. So
easier.
Yeah, we made it easier on them. So,
yeah.
But it was
strategy's
important.
A
blast. Yeah.
What do we got in the news? I know first thing you threw in there was the port fees. Stir supply chain chaos. What did you got on this?
Yeah, so it looks like a couple days ago, the Trump administration announced that they would be leveraging port fees on Chinese vessels. So on the 24th, they aim to impose hefty port fees on Chinese-built vessels and related measures to address China's growing influence in global shipbuilding and maritime sectors. The initiative follows a U.S. Trade Representative investigation that highlighted China's unfair practices initiated by U.S. labor unions in March of 2024. The proposed fees and measures are structured to target both Chinese-built vessels and operators with significant ties to Chinese shipbuilding. For instance, a Chinese-built vessel could face a $1.5 million fee per port call, while operators with over 50% Chinese-built fleets may pay an additional $1 million per visit. And it looks like the charges, just depending on your mix of operators and vessels, it could be anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million per port call for a vessel, which can significantly increase costs on imports and exports.
Those charges are typically passed through. It's not like that company just going to pay that bill and keep their charges the same. So if you're reliant on a carrier, I got to imagine that's going to drive up those costs, at least initially.
Right. And I don't know if you're familiar with John Conrad over at G Captain, if you've seen any of his stuff, but he wrote a book that became a movie about the Deepwater Horizon. I can't remember. I think Mark Wahlberg starred in it. So he wrote the book on that, and he's been very active in the freight space. And his kind of contention is that the U.S. has gone away from shipbuilding, and it's negatively impacting our military and our Navy. Like the Navy, according to him, the Navy has 3 ships that are ready to go, but because of various regulations in California and federally, we can't even get those ships off the port.
Military ships, though, or they're for cargo, for freight?
No, those are Navy military ships. But
here's the other question, though. I guess about that, though, because I'm also reading that, obviously they're trying to cut the DoD budget, I think 8% year over year. Is that basically a $10,000 drone now can take out a $2 billion ship? And I think the argument from the military is hey, you still need the presence of having the steel and the boat, somewhere in the world. However, it's not exactly seeming like an efficient use of funds.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, being the Navy guy, I'm kind of sympathetic to, the shipbuilding and that kind of aspect and having the sea power and presence. Because there is, I mean, if you look at the Cold War and different times in our history, the presence of naval fleets around the world, especially nuclear submarines and stuff like that, being able to sit off the coast, it is a force of power that can drive decisions.
Yeah, I think it's a deterrent, right? But again, I think if warfare shifts to more autonomous drones and autonomous boats, I mean, I've worked with some companies that are doing everything from autonomous submarines to autonomous jet skis and things. It's if you don't have to put a human in harm's way, and at least the other side is aware of that force, regardless of seeing it, I mean, does that matter as much as it used to, I guess, would be the case that I would make. Especially from a finance standpoint of view, right? If we're looking at cutting the budget, the deficit, and being able to get the government back in line from a budgetary standpoint, it seems like a lot of money to spend for a pretty subjective upside that historically, to your point, has existed. But if that's not the way we're, fighting wars into the future, how much longer does it make sense to spend massive amounts of money that gets funneled into all these contractors because that's the way we've always done it, right? I always think about that saying, right? The most damaging or harmful statement in any organization is, well, this is because that's the way we've always done it, right? But if the landscape is changing, you should be changing the way I think you're approaching the situation. I don't know. Curious to see how this plays out.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think there's some aspects to it too about bringing some of the manufacturing, because we obviously have some of the capabilities to build ships here, and so spending that kind of money on an aircraft carrier and whatnot, Yeah, it's a lot of money, but that's going to go back into the community if we're building it here versus overseas or
Some of it.
whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it will, but how much of it is waste and bloat? And again, like we could go on a whole episode and discuss this from like drone regulations and why other countries are ahead of us versus where we are. But also in the news, we've got the Trump tariffs coming up. He just said this week they will be happening on time and on schedule. I think March 3rd or 4th is when they're supposed to go into effect for Canada and Mexico. Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is working to negotiate a deal while Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly vows retaliation. Targeted goods, oil, auto parts, electronics, and food imports will bear the brunt, affecting industries across the U.S. I will tell you on the ground, we move a lot of food here in the, prospectively. Like we have a lot of customers that do move food and things and auto parts, and so many companies have reached out to us in the past week or two trying to expedite goods from Canada into the US ahead of this, like ramping up their shipping, trying to get things out and into the US as fast as possible just in case this happens. And I'm also seeing, again, from practical standpoint, what we're seeing on the ground. We move a lot of like aluminum, metal. We've got quite a few scrap customers too that feed into that industry. And that is also being affected by what's happening in the auto industry, because it seems like from what I've read, Jason Miller put a bunch on this, is that like when the auto industry doesn't know what is going to happen in the future, they don't really know where they're going to buy things. So they're holding off on orders, or they're probably hedging and trying to figure out what is the best way to reduce costs if it does happen while making sure they have enough materials. That's already going all the way downstream into like the metal industry, where we're seeing load volumes, definitely slow down. The customers are telling us that orders are slowing down because their customers don't really know and aren't really sure what production is going to look like 45 days from now, 2 months from now. So everybody's more of like a hold and wait. So it's certainly not increasing transportation or freight in the way I think, well, at least Craig had promised back in November.
Yeah.
Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? Quickscope stands out as the only load-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, Quickscope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today.
Yeah, that's a fact. I know it's been a slow uphill climb based on, the different talking heads and accounts that are putting out. There were DAT, Canadamo, Sonar, Truck Stop, I think they were all kind of excited for the bolstering of the market, and it's been a slow burn. So
yeah, it was all a bunch of hype. Nobody really looked at it. And it's funny because like all the people that looked at it fundamentally and didn't seem to be buying into the hype made some pretty good arguments that this is what it was going to look like. And it's kind of playing out more in line with what I would say the academic people thought this would look like with the things they had said they were going to do versus what is actually happening. So we'll see what the future holds. Also, Trump eyeing USPS, the postal system, transfer to the Commerce Department, sparking privatization concerns. Trump is planning an executive order to transfer control of the Postal Service to, again, the Commerce Department, stripping it of its independent status. The case they're making is like the USPS loses a bunch of money every year. It's certainly not profitable. I don't think they've ever raised their prices in line with their costs. So, I think there's a good economic argument to do this. However, what that'll look like in practice, who knows? It said it followed the Postmaster General's surprise resignation. Critics say that, and the union workers, that this will increase disruptions and higher costs. Well, I think at the end of the day, like, nobody wants higher costs, but like, we're paying for that no matter what. Like, you're paying for it in taxes, you're paying for it in the budget, you're paying for it in interest rates. It's not a free ride to subsidize shipping with government. Like, it does not get cheaper or more efficient.
Right. And so I worked at Amazon for a year before I got into this, and one of the things they always talked about was how Amazon effectively subsidizes USPS because they leverage a contract to have the USPS deliver on Sundays for them, and they pay them a lot of money to get that stuff done. And I don't know, I would have to have this checked, but I know they were talking about how it's like it's a profit loss to have them do it, but at least for the Sunday like deliveries, the next day deliveries or whatever that the USPS does for them. But yeah, I know that was one major thing, is that if you took Amazon away, or if you took the USPS away from Amazon, it would effectively destroy the postal service.
I'll be curious to see. Well, let's jump into the topic. So you have spent a lot of time in the past week working on accounting and back office stuff. Do you want to dig in at first on like kind of let's outline what the process looks like from a simple point of view, and then talk about some of the things that you were running into, right? So
Yeah.
I think for everyone out there, right, the basics of what we're going to talk about today is like, what does back office mean? And when we say back office, we're going to talk specifically about invoicing, billing, collecting money, and paying money. So more on like the accounting side, as opposed to like tech, HR things, back office that are also kind of in that bucket. But, from just a very simple standpoint, right? Steven, your trucking company runs a load for me. You're going to run that load. You're going to get a POD, proof of delivery. It's signed at delivery. Your trucking company is going to send that to me, hopefully when you deliver the load, so that I can check for a few things. Did the load deliver clean? What does clean mean? Did it have detention? Did it have a claim? Did it have any other fees associated with it that might have happened either in transit or at delivery? Once I get that invoice, I can let my customer know, one, that it was delivered, and I know that it was delivered, not just that someone said it was delivered, right? Because that's an issue in and of itself sometimes. Secondly, I can let them know there were no additional charges. So then once I take your POD, you're also going to send me the rate con that I sent you, right? Which has the rate we agreed for that shipment. It's going to have the POD and usually your trucking company's invoice. So you get 3 documents back. I will take those 3 documents that usually come over as like one PDF. Some companies will split them up, but usually the trucking companies send them over as like one file. So then I've got to take that file as a freight brokerage, split them up. I'm not going to send my rate con to my customer. I only need the POD, right? And I don't need your invoice. So once I split those documents, I will save them separately in my TMS. I'm going to save the trucking company invoice, which has your company's invoice number on it. I'm going to save the POD in there, and the Raycon I've already had. You're just sending me that so I could match it up with the correct load. In case maybe you ran multiple shipments on the same days with the same trucking company. And I can match up exactly which one was with which load, which truck, which rate, what situation, right? Now, this is the important piece that I don't think lots of companies do. You should save this for sure in your TMS. One, not only does it make it easier for your accounting department or everybody to work from one system. 2, your operations team needs to look at this to communicate with your customer, like I said, that it was delivered with no additional charges. 2, the accounting team can go and see what is where. And then you take the POD out, then the freight brokerage, if there's no factoring company, is going to create its own invoice, attach the POD, and sometimes the load tender from the customer, right, which is the contract between the shipper and the broker. We're going to send that POD. We're going to send the invoice to our customer with the load tender, which was their agreement and what they agreed to pay to us, to them, which starts the clock. That's the important piece. As soon as they get that invoice, that 30-day term for that customer starts when they receive it, not when the load is delivered. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. If you delivered a load today and don't send that invoice to your customer for 30 days, and they're on 30-day terms, you don't get paid for 60 days. The second thing that happens is when the trucking company sends it to me, that starts the clock on the days to pay the carrier. Why is that important? It affects the brokerage's credit rating. It affects your rating on DAT for days to pay and your credit score, right? So then I've got to set up my payment to you on the terms, maybe your quick pay, maybe your standard. I would say industry average is probably around 21, 22 days. Some brokerages pay on 30 days, some pay 14 a little earlier. And if you opted for quick pay, usually there's a fee. Maybe it's 3%, 5% to get paid in a day, 3 days, or 7 days. You get your money faster. There's a little bit of a premium. The brokerage charges to pay you quicker. And then again, they wait to get their money from their customer, right? So did I miss anything on just how this process needs to work from like a simple point of view?
No, that's pretty much the 101 level, and kind of how I've always explained it. The simple balancing of a checkbook, right? It's money in versus money out, and what processes are in the money in, and what processes are in the money out, and how do you identify and tag all those so that.
Yes. Now, here are some of the common things that arise in this process that we'll dig into. One, detention. Okay, let's just talk through detention. So detention, the way it should happen, right, is that carrier should have signed at both the shipper and the receiver check-in time, check-out time. Not just the driver's signature, but also someone at that facility, right? Because without someone at the facility, your customer doesn't know whether or not there were two people that saw that or just the driver's word. They usually want someone at their location signing when they arrived, when they left, right? Every shipper has different detention policies. For carriers out there, you should ask this before you run the load, not after. How many hours free? What is the rate on detention? On both sides, pickup and delivery, because they might be different, right? Then what the broker does is we have to take that document, then send it over to the customer and wait to have it approved, right? And then once it's approved, then we will send the carrier an updated rate con, right? Which then you've got to change your invoice as a trucking company on your side to make sure you account for the more additional money coming in for detention on top of the load. The broker should make no money on this. It's just an addition on the rate con to the carrier and an addition to the bill to the shipper, right? So what are the common issues you see related to detention that tend to come up?
The biggest one, especially with those carriers that are, strapped for cash and use a factoring company, they're going to get their paperwork, they're going to send it to the factoring company, and you're going to get an invoice. And then, and it's not going to have the detention on it, but they're going to be hounding you for detention, right? And then finally, you'll send them a revised rate confirmation for the detention, but you never see an updated invoice. And then you pay them at 30 days, and you get an email, why'd you short pay me? I was like, you guys never resent the invoice. Mm-hmm. You got your rate confirmation, but a rate confirmation is, while it's a promise to pay, there are still steps that you have to take to get paid.
Yes.
And so then they'll send the updated invoice, and that starts the timer again for 30 days, right? So
correct.
Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean I can necessarily pay this out today. Accounting's got its own processes. They've got other bills to pay first. So it's all in like this, first come, first serve system. And granted, if you have different pay terms, quick pay, whatever, obviously those get priority. But, that's a huge common mistake. And that goes with any accessorial fee, whether it's lumpers or detention or labor,
Yes. Any additional charges, right? If you're on the carrier side, listen to this. One of the things you can do to get paid faster is to make sure you are doing this process consistently, right? Your driver runs a load, he gets detention, right? Wait until you get the detention approved, then send the invoice to the broker, right? And if you get the bill of lading over to that broker when that driver delivers, even if it's like a photo, right, of the BOL, and then the dispatcher sends an email, hey, here's the check-in, here's the checkout, here's the attached BOL, please request detention. The sooner you get that, The faster the broker can get it to the shipper, the faster the shipper can get back to the broker, then you can invoice the brokerage, hopefully tomorrow or even later that day with the whole invoice. Not just the load, but the load and the detention. Same thing for lumpers and in drayage. There's lots of accessorials. We're not going to go into all of them, but any additional charge, the faster you get your paperwork from your driver, get it to the broker and state in that email what it is, the sooner you can get the invoice over and start the clock to get paid. And to your point, right, if you're a trucking company using a factoring company, right, a lot of times the trucking company will just, like you said, send the rate con over to the factoring company to get paid on the line haul and the fuel or the spot rate. But then like they wait to get the detention and then they send that to the broker, but then the factoring company doesn't get it. And remember, the factoring company sent that brokerage a notice of assignment. That letter and that document from that factoring company states the brokerage cannot pay the carrier directly. So then they've got to wait for the factoring company to get the additional charge, for the factoring company to now invoice the brokerage before they can pay that, and before the factoring company is going to approve the advance on the detention, right? All of those steps, right? If you're consistent, you get the money faster.
In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes. The more you wait to do these things, a few days, the driver will get it to you when he's, 3 days or back to the office that Friday. Like, the longer it's taking you to get money, and for small trucking companies, getting money quicker is one of the most important aspects of running that business. Cash flow is crucial to a trucking company. They're thinner margins. They need that money as fast as possible. The faster you can get your documents together and invoice correctly, the faster the broker can pay you. Now, the same thing with a broker and a shipper, right? If a broker is using a factoring company, like, you need to be able as a brokerage to update the terms, the invoices to your shipper, to your factoring company. Whether you use Triumph, whether you use HaulPay, whether you use any factoring company, right? The sooner you get these documents, the easier it is. Some factoring companies, for a brokerage, it is much more difficult to add an additional charge once you've already sent the invoice through factoring. Like, if you're a broker in some factoring companies I've seen, say I submit my normal invoice to my shipper, and then 5 days later, I get a request from the carrier for another charge, accessorial, lumper, detention, or whatever. I have to create a whole other transaction in my factoring company system with another PO, which then sends 2 bills to my customer. Then my customer has to figure out, okay, why am I getting 2 bills for the same PO? When they have to figure that out, that slows them from paying the factoring company, right? And if there's no factoring company, sending 2 bills with 2 different POs sometimes makes it harder for the shipper to actually reconcile and pay these bills. And they seem like things that are really simple, and they are, but like, they're not easy in a sense that, like, you really need to organize these every day. If you're running 20, 30, 50, 100 loads a day, keeping track of when you have additional charges, which POs they're associated with, can get really messy very quickly. And then all of a sudden, a week later, you're spending every Saturday and Sunday just trying to figure out what happened. And I would say one of the most common things that I see with newer brokers is they don't put everything in the TMS. They just leave it in their email. But then when they go to invoice Saturday or Sunday at the end of the week, they're spending 5 times as long trying to invoice every load, searching through their emails, rather than just going into the TMS where the documents would have been saved if they did that while it was happening, and invoicing. Like, it shouldn't take you more than somewhere between probably 1.5 minutes and 5 minutes to invoice a load if you are efficient and you do this over and over again, right? I see companies, it takes 20 minutes to invoice a load. If you're running even 20 loads a week, right? Like, you're spending hours every weekend invoicing your customers, paying your carriers, slowing down the time it takes to get your money from your customers and paying out your carriers, which hurts your credit, hurts your cash flow, is longer for you to get paid to make money on the work you've already done. All of these things will help you get money in the door and through the door to the other door, right? To the carriers so much faster. Your time, and they call it like cash flow conversion cycle. It's just a fancy word for like, how long does it take from when I do work or sell something to when the money goes all the way around and comes back, right? The tighter that circle is and the faster you can do that process, the more money you have on hand to run your business, whether it's to grow it or to just pay yourself to make sure you got enough money to pay your mortgage and your grocery bill at the end of the week.
Yeah, and two like asterisks, right, to that, to what you just said. The first, when you were talking about the accessorial fees to like the carriers and getting the invoices done properly for detention and whatnot, the biggest thing I could point out is if you're going to be requesting detention or accessorial fees or anything like that, read the fine print. Understand what the broker, because every brokerage and every shipper has different requirements when it comes to detention versus lumber fees or anything like that. And if you don't follow the rate confirmation, that contract that you signed properly, there's a good chance that you won't get reimbursed, and they're just going to send you a snippet of that part of the contract. Be like, you didn't do what we told you to do.
Yes.
You're going to get upset and whatever. And that's very easy to do in this industry because it's a very chaotic job field. And so it's
Correct.
easy to miss those things, but that's one of the key things when you're working with brokerages or shippers, like, know what the requirements are. And
Here's a few
go
examples.
ahead.
Yeah. So let's go through a few examples of those. Some that I've seen very recently, and there's really good justifications, but they cause lots of issues because people aren't reading or paying attention to the details, right? A lot of shippers I've seen in the past year have put in additional charges that they will charge both a broker or a carrier if they work with them directly, right? One is like a missed appointment without 24-hour or some time frame notification. If you let them know within like 3 hours or 4 hours that you need to reschedule the appointment in some cases, like, there's no charge. But if you missed that appointment and didn't communicate to the shipper, if you're just a carrier working with a shipper, just take the broker out of it, right? And you tell them a half an hour, 40 minutes before your appointment, you need to reschedule it. I've seen these as high as $300, right? Rescheduling fees. Okay. So when a broker is working with a shipper and that contract says to the broker, hey, if you've got to reschedule an appointment, we need, just call it 4 hours notice, right? Some are 12, but let's just call it 4, something that is reasonable. Like, you should probably know if you need to reschedule this within a few hours. And most shippers, I will also say, are pretty lenient on enforcing this. Like, we had one that had very stringent ones. They were like 24 hours to reschedule or $300, like. But if we sent them an email at least an hour before the appointment, or maybe 2 hours, and said, hey, look, the guy's a little delayed at his last receiver, there's traffic, we need to reschedule this, they would never really charge us for that. But when a carrier would tell us, hey, we're good for the appointment, in a lot of the cases, like, I can assure you the dispatcher just didn't call the driver. And here's the other where this comes up. The driver wouldn't accept tracking, right? So like, the broker has no idea. The dispatcher is telling the broker, carrier's on time for his 1 o'clock appointment. He shows up at 1:45, right? Now here's what comes into play. One, the broker gets charged $300, which we need to charge the carrier for because, like, we didn't know. We tried to find out. We tried to send tracking. They didn't accept it. Dispatcher told us, didn't bother calling the driver, or thought they could just get it worked in if they were 45 minutes late and just hoped, right? That happens sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't, to your point. Every shipper is different. Just because one facility will work you in if you're late doesn't mean like a Costco facility is going to. Now, here's the second thing that happens. So now you're 45 minutes late for your appointment. And this is where I have like a lot of empathy for drivers, because I've worked with dispatchers that know that driver's late, will lie to a broker, tell the driver there'll be a work-in. And then when you talk to the driver's like, hey man, I told my dispatcher I was going to be late. Did he tell you? And we're like, no man, he sent an email so you're going to be on time, but I can't get you unloaded now. Like you're going to be a work-in. It might be you were supposed to unload at 10 that morning. They might not get you worked in until 6 o'clock tonight. Second thing, the driver's upset because the dispatcher didn't communicate, right? Or made a mistake, maybe just missed that detail. Here's the second problem that now comes up. That driver is not getting paid detention because you missed the appointment and you didn't communicate, which means you're not eligible for detention and you might be there 6 hours. Say they don't get you worked in by 6 and they got to unload you the next morning. Most of these shippers won't pay a layover because you missed the appointment, which means now the driver wasted a whole day all because the dispatcher missed this. They didn't maybe accept tracking. Nobody communicated to the broker and the shipper's like, hey, look, I told you these policies. And then you get the carrier sends the invoice and wants to file against the broker's bond, right? Because there's a deduction on the load, right? And now, as a freight broker, for anyone out there, if you work with shippers that have these types of policies, if they're not in your rate con, guess what? That carrier is going to win and you are not able to charge them the $300 for the missed appointment because it wasn't in your agreement to the carrier, which is just another really good reminder. You're talking about making sure you look at the details in your agreements as a carrier to a broker, which is your rate con, but you also need to be doing this as a broker. If you have different shippers and one has completely different policies for charges for things like missed appointment, detention, visibility and tracking, there's shippers that will deduct money because they don't have tracking on the load for a day. $150 a day of tracking is not there, right? Because that creates more work for them. That's why they charge this. And then you try to charge this to the carrier or reduce their fee by that. If it's not in your rate con and that carrier files against your bond, the bond almost always will side with the carrier because it wasn't in writing. The one tip I will say is if you have a shipper with lots of charges for like just missed appointments, for example, it's much easier, one, for the carrier and driver to understand that if you line item your rate con. A lot of people just put the words deep in the fine print of the rate con. Oh, $300 for missed appointment, $150 a day for tracking. And then we'll get to this one in a second. $150 if we don't get the POD in 24 or 48 hours, right? Then you charge them and they go, well, what is this? I didn't know what this is. And the broker goes, well, it's in the rate con. And dispatcher's like, I see 40 of these a day. I can't read every one of these to book these trucks. I don't have time. So one of the things that I think is it's service, right? Like that a broker can do to be more transparent to both the carrier. Because at the end of the day, brokers don't want to charge these. They're more work. A shipper doesn't want to charge them. They just want to know what's happening and they want communication. So where these fees come from is to try to elicit or create more communication because it creates more work for everybody when nobody knows what's happening, right? So the fees became or were put in place originally just to be able to elicit more communication. So if you have a rate con, right? Say it's $1,000 spot rate for a load, right? And let's just say your shipper says, I need tracking for both days. I am going to charge you $150 if I don't have tracking one day. Instead of your rate con saying $1,000, and it's a 2-day run, it should be a $700 charge for line haul and fuel and $150 for day 1 tracking, $150 for day 2 tracking. Because that way, at least when the dispatcher sees it, even if they don't read the fine print, they can see they are getting paid $300 out of that $1,000 for tracking. And if it's not on one day, when you reduce it, it's very clear. You don't need them to feel like they need an attorney to read a rate con. And then when you send it, if a problem arises, there's no miscommunication. The driver usually has the rate con too. So if the driver sees that, he realizes, hey, tracking is really important to this customer, the shipper. If I can't get it to work, next time you stop, call the broker and say, hey man, help me figure this out. For whatever reason, the tracking doesn't seem to be live. Help me fix this. And even if you can't get it to work because there's a tech issue on your phone, a broker will usually help you. Hey man, just shoot me a text like my customer needs it every 3 hours. Just ping me every 3 hours. Let me know your location. I'll manually send tracking to my customer so that you don't get reduced. If both the carrier and the driver, right, are working with a broker, most of the time, 99% of these fees never come up, right? Even if things go wrong, you break down, stuff happens, you're stuck at a receiver. If you're communicating ahead of time with the broker or as a carrier working directly with the shipper, They almost never charge these. They only charge them when they feel like nobody told them what was happening. Their customer called and yelled at them when, where the hell's this truck? He was supposed to be here 2 hours ago, and nobody had any information about it. That's the thing that everybody's just trying to avoid, where these things actually arise from fees in the first place.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to point out, especially like with the rescheduling fees, right? Because so 90% of my business is in the refrigerated space, and companies like Lineage and Americold, and they are, I would say they probably created half of these fees, but they did it for good reason. Because if you think about it, a lot of these warehouses, especially Lineage in specific, when they get a request to ship a load, right? When that truck's getting loaded, they're not going back to the racks for each individual pallet. They're staging that product ahead of time, and it's in order based on when the truck arrives. So those late fees, like if you're a half hour late, right? It's not because they're trying to grab money. It's because now you've added extra work to that dock worker's day, because he has to get that stuff out of the way so he can load the next truck because you were late. Or like for the reschedule.
Explain that to somebody, because I want to stop on that one, because I want everyone to really visualize this, right? There are shippers, right, that before your truck arrives are literally taking every PO, sometimes pallet, sometimes every box and crate, putting them on a pallet, taking those pallets out of a warehouse, putting them on a loading dock, and lining them up for that truck. So if that truck doesn't come in at 10 and they've got to load the one coming in at 11 first, somebody has to physically take all of that product and either put it back on the shelf or move it back into the warehouse, then get the other one to put it on that dock where that one was, right? So the fee, to your point, isn't to generate more income. It's to pay the people there to do twice the work that they had to do because nobody communicated that ahead of time.
Right. Yeah, and it's really, I mean, it's to cover a loss, right? Because, time is money, and they're having to put extra time into it. I mean, one of the facilities that I ship out of all the time, just to like get even more detailed into it, right? Like this facility, I normally will have 2 to 3 stops coming out of that warehouse. Now this warehouse is automated, and it's a cold storage, right? So for example, the places that these stops go to normally all deliver in the morning, and you can't get all 3 stops off on the same day. But depending on when appointments come through, we have to adjust them. However, if I don't let the shipper know within 24 hours, the warehouse has already, in its automation, has stacked those POs in order, and they can't adjust them when they load it. So now I just have to, work a truck in or whatever. And those are those experiences that you have them once and you try to never repeat it again because it's such a pain.
Yes.
But yeah, that's one of those things that, a lot of people don't take into account, like Costco, for example. A lot of Costco's frozen freight that goes into Costco, a lot of those facilities have shifting bulkheads, so they'll only take frozen product, say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? If you've got a Wednesday appointment and you miss it, they physically cannot take it on Thursday because the amount of space has been physically shrunk to take refrigerated
filled up.
Mm-hmm. And now you have to wait until Friday. And a lot of drivers are like, well, why can't they just take it? Why can't they do it? This needs to go to a cold storage. It's like nobody else is going to pay for that mistake because you were late.
Yes.
And
again, things happen, but if you communicate, you can usually work through it in a way that keeps and helps everybody. Because I think anybody I've ever really talked to that works in this industry, as a shipper, at a broker, or on like the carrier side. Well, let's go broker and shipper side, right? Like if they've been in the industry more than a year, give or take, and kind of know their job and have been doing it, like everybody knows and expects things to go wrong. Everybody knows things happen when you're driving there on the road, right? Whether it's a blown tire, a mechanical issue, traffic, weather, stuck for whatever reason. Nobody I've ever talked to since I've been in this industry has yelled at me because something happened. What they always are upset about is that they didn't know about it when it happened, right? Like nobody's ever getting upset because things go wrong, because most, I would say, in almost every instance, people are fairly understanding. It's the work it creates that then they get frustrated, right? Like I run into the same thing. You're talking cold storage. Tanker stuff happens all the time. Like we have a customer we deliver product to. Well, they have different days that their tanks can receive different products. They can't just change out all of their pumps, reconnect them to a different part that is receiving it because the guy didn't get there yesterday and he's going to get there tomorrow or today, right? Like, no, like food grade comes on these days of the week. These days of the week, our non-food grade product comes in. We can't change our pump lines out. You can't run a non-food grade line through a pump that you put in through another one. Like they need to be sterilized. They need to go through Kersher certifications. You can't just switch them out just because things were a day late. Like the facilities also have to be efficient, right? Whether you're taking stuff out or taking stuff to any of these places.
Right. And so one of the things, like, so the topic is back office, right? And one of the things I really like, because it's something I've been dealing with very intimately for the last week, is, we talk about the accessorial charges and all these different things. But your TMS system is very important when organizing your back office, because a lot of these, especially newer brokerages, are going to look at the TMS as like a tool to do operations, which it 100% is. It needs to be able to help you in sourcing carriers and, sending rate confirmations and communicating with your carrier base. Those are all great. However, if you don't take the time to understand your TMS, you're going to make very critical mistakes in the back office piece. So one perfect example. One thing our TMS does, if we use it properly, is all those things we talk, late fees, truck order not used, detention, layover, they're all separate fees. They all need to go to a different place so that you can see them, itemize them, and understand what the money in and the money out is. Also, like in the case, like if you use an EFS, so if you have a lumper fee, right? If you as a broker pay that lumper fee for the carrier, that's a different accounting procedure than if the carrier pays for it and you reimburse them. What a lot of mistakes people do with any software is they get it and they say, "Oh, I got it. I can figure it out." And then they do what our company did, and all of those accounting transactions went to the same bucket. So for the last 3 years, our accounting person has just been printing off a list manually and separating each charge into an Excel file and then doing reconciliation on, we've got 125 trucks plus give or take 500 loads to the brokerage. So if you look at the year, you're looking at $38 million in transactions on an average $1,200 invoice. So like that is a ton of work. And all of that can be done in 2 minutes if they had set up the codes properly.
If you put it in correctly. Yes.
And the TMS does it all itself. But people want, there's two problems with the current issue. Right? So the software is a little bit too complicated or convoluted for your average carrier operator management or the broker, and or the TMS that you purchase from. They don't really explain it effectively, because a lot of the TMS providers, some of them have a freight background, not all of them do. And every carrier is different. They have different trucks. They have different situations. So not every organization is built the same or will account the same. So it's one of those things that you really need to spend that extra time to make sure that your back office is running just as smoothly as your operations is. Or
yes.
3 years.
And I'm going to give you an analogy, right? Like setting it up correctly is time consuming and nobody likes to do it, right? However, when you set these systems up correctly and you spend the time to either train your employees, or if you're just yourself running a brokerage or a trucking company, right? Just spending a few days or even a few weeks will save you so much time in the future that it is really hard to explain, right? Like think of it as an investment, except investing money that grows in an account, you're investing time that you get back every day in the future, right? So for like from the accounting side, right, I'll give everyone an analogy that like you don't need to understand McLeod or to set up an accounting system for a trucking company or 150 trucks or even a brokerage. But like we did this for our personal finances. We used Monarch, right? And basically, it's an app where you put all of your bank accounts in it and all of your bills, and then it tells you itemized where your money comes from and where your money goes from like a personal family standpoint. So like we have a few businesses and different bank accounts. So for me, it was really hard to figure out like what we were spending on which categories. How much you spend on like delivery food versus takeout, right? And at the end of the month, it's helpful to know because like you can't improve these things if you don't know what is happening, right? So even if you're just a family, think about this, right? Like it took me literally probably 2 days over a weekend, a couple hours each day to go through most of the transactions, and it buckets them like, hey, these bank accounts, these are this is what we think it is. But you have to manually go in and call those transactions what you want them to call so that you can see them as a group every month, right? So I went through all of our stuff and I went, okay, anytime it sees this charge, that is takeout food. Anytime it sees this charge or Uber Eats, that was we ordered food because we didn't want to drive, right? All of these charges are grocery store. So they all sit under food, but having them sit under food doesn't help me improve our finances as a family, right? I'm like, okay, like if we spent way more on delivery food one month, we want to look at this and go, okay, well, like maybe we need to just plan a little better on the weekends to make this a little smaller, right? Maybe not get rid of it, but to just do this a little less, right? Oh, I didn't realize we spent this much. Take Amazon. Everybody just looks at Amazon charges. This is what I spent on Amazon. It's not a surprise Amazon doesn't give you an itemized bill to tell you where you spent your money because they want you to just keep spending. But when you look at what we were spending in Amazon, some of that's business stuff for businesses, the office. Some of it was personal stuff, right? So literally categorizing these things allow us to have visibility into what is really happening in our family. It's the same as your business, right? If every transaction you have is just categorized in one bucket, like you just said, how many times did we have to fix our truck? Because maintenance all of a sudden just was lumped in there with fuel, which was lumped in there with every other driver expense like food. Driver ate versus driver had a tire fixed versus driver did this. I have no idea which went where. Which one do I need to work on? Do we need to maintain our trucks a little better so we have less breakdowns? I don't know, because everything's in one bucket, right? How do you figure out what is associated with what if you don't put these things in correctly, right? So just as like the TMS is only as good as the information you put in it, that's why we were talking about putting PODs, getting these things in the first place, you can't get them out. If you're running your accounting system, if you aren't properly categorizing what's happening, you don't know. I can't tell you, Stephen, in the past 2 years, if I probably worked with 40 different trucking companies as clients, I would say 90% of them had a TMS and 90% of them put all of their loads into like a Google Sheet or some Google Drive rather than putting their trucks, their loads, and their expenses in the TMS. And then we go, hey, they're like, we want to be able to make more money. We want to be more efficient. And then I look at their records and I'm like, I don't know what you've done because like we have no way to get the information out. I'm like, I don't know what you're spending on maintenance. I don't know how many miles a week your average driver's doing. I don't know what the rate per mile is that you guys are getting on a weekly basis for a driver. I don't know what your maintenance expense is per truck. You just have one bucket. This is what we spend on maintenance every month. We got 25 trucks in some instances. Which trucks were getting more maintenance? Are they just the older ones? Is it one driver has a lot of maintenance because he's beating one truck up and you need to work with him on like whatever? Is it because you just deferred maintenance on a few of these? And they're like, oh, well, I kind of have it in my head. Well, just because you kind of remember it doesn't mean you have the details you need to actually improve it, right? Like there's this cheesy saying, like measure what matters. If you don't have measurements and categories of what is happening with your money, both coming in and going out, you don't know where you need to fix things because it's all just blowing out the window and you have no idea which window to close or to pull a little bit shut or to figure out where you need to focus to improve things if you don't know where it's going in the first place.
Right. And just to like add on to that, right, is, you know, and this I think this is common for anyone regardless of the industry, but, you know, companies like newer brokerages ask all the time, what software should I get? What should I do? And you can give them whatever answer you want. But the biggest problem is if you don't take the time to understand the software, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because
it doesn't work.
Because what most people do, and I'm guilty of it too, because I'm a tech nerd. I like to download the newest and greatest things, and I'll spend 20 minutes on it, and I'll put some stuff in there, and I'm like, all right, this is great, this works. And then I come to find out like 2 months down the road that I wasn't using it at all correctly, and
Yep.
it's causing me more pain than good. So, for example, like the TMS system, kind of what you were talking about with maintenance and tracking and trailers and whatnot, is you know there is a cost to like a lot of carriers will purchase like McLeod, for example. That's a $500,000 TMS system.
And use 5% of it.
Exactly.
Or none
And
of
the
it.
problem is, there is a cost to transitioning from an old system to a new system or paper to a TMS, but somebody on the team has to dive in the deep end and figure this thing out. While maybe you're, for 2 months or 3 months, you're still using this old system. But if you're still like using two systems, or you've transitioned from your old system to McLeod and Google Sheets, and you're still at a year or 2 years and you've got half your information in Google Sheets and the other half in the cloud because, well, this is just easier.
Yep.
You're doing yourself a huge disservice, and it's really just wrecking the
Correct.
back office.
And I'll give you two like practical things, right? Is just because you save the information does not mean one, you can retrieve it, and two, does not mean you can retrieve it in a way that you can use it. And I'll give you an example, right? Lots of trucking companies will do things on paper. They'll be like, I've clients, I got a whole file cabinet of every load I've run. I'm like, great. Well, one of the best ways to prospect is to go through the places you've delivered to that wasn't your broker's customer. Say, hey, like we've been to your facility, like drivers are familiar with it. You guys are close to us. It's a good lane. Would like to be able to talk to you about possibly working with you directly, right? And then they go, great, well, I got all this information. And then you know what happens? I'll talk to them every other week. Hey, how's it going getting all of this paperwork out so we can get a list of the companies you want to call? Oh man, I just don't have time to do that. Nobody has time to do that. You're running a business, right? So you might have saved all this information, but it's literally useless because like you can't get it out without paying somebody to go through all those and put them into a sheet. Even if you wrote it on paper, you either got to spend hours taking all that out, writing down each one on another sheet of paper, or typing them into a spreadsheet to be able to do anything with it, right? So again, like there are lots of things that you could do to improve your business, to make more money, to improve cash flow, to improve efficiency, to figure out where you're making money and where you're not making money. You can't even start to think about where to make those decisions unless the information is readily available. If you're a broker, that's your TMS. If you're a trucking company, it's your TMS, and both of them and both of your accounting systems, whether they're connected or not, like they need to be categorized because a business lives on cash the same way a person's blood flow, right? Like if you can't figure out why your arm hurts and you realize like you have poor circulation, you can see that. In a business, if you don't know where your money went, you don't know where things need to be fixed because that is the diagnostic tool. Doctor gives you a bunch of tests to figure out what's wrong with you. If you bring in a business consultant, I don't care if you bring in McKinsey at, $1,000 an hour, they can't help you if they don't know what's happening. The first thing they're going to do is charge you 10, 20 grand to get all of your stuff organized to just understand what is happening. And if you're a business owner, even a trucking company, even a one-person owner op, right? You really don't know how well you're doing unless you not just look at how much money hits my bank account to spend every month, but where are you spending money? Where are your expenses going? Can they be improved? Do you need to look at other lanes to run, other regions, different equipment types? You just have no idea because none of that information is there to be able to make any decisions with. So,
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, the biggest thing I point at in the last couple of weeks when we've been dealing with some of the issues on our end is like, how can you know your true costs if your true costs are spread out amongst 3 different systems? Because the only way to get an actual calculation now is you have to run 3 different reports, copy and paste them into Excel, and then cross your fingers that the AI macro that I had built is doing math right. So it's like
correct.
And even that takes hours to build. So it's very important to make sure, especially when you're doing any kind of purchases in tech and whatnot, like if you don't understand it or don't want to spend the time to understand it, at least hire somebody or have the TMS provider or whatever software that you're buying explain it to you in detail, because you're just going to cause a mountain of problems down the road.
Exactly. And again, like these are the simple things. They're not easy because they take time and everybody's tired and everybody's doing their best to try to make more money. And I know whether you're a carrier or a broker, the market hasn't been great for 3 years and nobody wants to think like, oh, I am going to spend a few more hours every week doing something that doesn't make me money. Like nobody ever wakes up and goes, boy, I'd love to dig in and reorganize my accounting and finance and my books. Like nobody wants to do that. However, like it is a requirement of running a successful business. Like it is a necessity. And the longer you put this off, the more problems are happening that you have no idea about. Like it'd be like, hey, I'd love to be able to get diagnosed with cancer when it's still treatable, but basically everyone's business is waiting until it's stage 4. They're going out of business and they have no idea what happened and they want to point their finger at everyone else, right? Like everybody is responsible for the businesses they run and whether or not they're doing well or not well. And almost most companies only look at one metric. How much cash is hitting my bank account? That is just the result. That is telling you nothing about what is happening in between the work you performed and the money you get. And a lot of times, I would say most, there's more money there that is going out a door in a way that you don't realize that you could probably be better at and more efficient at if you spend more time on these things.
Yeah, the 2 worst times to figure out that you have a problem is tax season and when your bank account hits 0.
Yeah, it's too late to do anything to fix it at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, sweet, man. Any final thoughts?
No, make sure to like, share, subscribe, leave us some comments below. Let us know what you think about the conversation. If you have any questions, hit us up on all the socials. We're active on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So, yeah.
Sweet. And whether you believe you think you can or believe you can't, you're right.
That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.